Join Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle as he delivers to us the preachings of the Sunday's Gospel that's awe-inspiring yet easy to understand and appreciate. Let us all listen to the Word of God here on The Word Exposed on Air, only on Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM. Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM.
And there was another drive-by shooting.
The fire we reported at the fire hall is still burning out.
Do you sometimes feel confused or lost in the complications and complexities of life? Do you feel drained, listless, or exhausted from the daily burdens and responsibilities? Why not seek our campus ministers on air every Tuesday from 2 to 3 in the afternoon? Listen to our counselors from the Loyola School's Campus Ministry Office as they ground our lives in our faith, in our school's spiritual tradition. Campus Ministers on Air. Be guided, be inspired, be blessed. Listen to our Campus Ministers on Air.
Calling on all young male professionals. Do you wish to live an extraordinary life? Are you tired of the routine and mundane and long for a dynamic, adventurous, and even dangerous life? Do you wish to make your life count and hope to make an impact long after you're gone? Do you wish to live a life of service to society, to country, and to dear Mother Earth? Then you are the one we are looking for. Consider the Society of Jesus. Join the Church's gallant army and turn your world upside down. Call the Jesuits Vocations Promotions Team 426-6101, local 3406. Once again, 426-6101, local 3406.
Rejoice, refresh, renew, and reflect. Join us for an hour of music that uplifts the soul. Listen to your favorite Jesuit music ministry artists. This is JMM Radio. JMM Radio. Get your day's dose of inspirational music. Tune in to JMM Radio every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Only here on Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM. Radyo Katipunan. News, insights, inspiration. Radyo Katipunan. Down from the hill and down to the world. Radyo Katipunan, the voice of the Blue Eagle. Tara na't simulan ng inyong umaga sa mga magagandang refleksyon tungkol sa ating buhay at pananampalataya. Kasama sina Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, Father J. Boy Gonzales at Father Nono Alfonso ng Kapisanan ni Jesus, Father Cali Llamado ng Manila Cathedral at Binibining Risa Singson Kaupeng ng Light of Jesus Community dito sa Kapit Pandasal sa Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM.
Saan ka nakatingin? Ako si Risa Singson Kaupeng, book author at editor. Magkapit pandasal muna tayo. Nabasa ko ang kwentong ito kay Father Jerry Orbos. May isang mama na nakapulot ng $1 sa kalye. Pakaswerteng mama, di ba? Pero pagkatapos nun, palaging nasa sahig ang tingin ng mama dahil baka makapulot siya ulit ng $1. Dahil doon, hindi na niya napansin ang magandang tanawin sa kanyang paligid, ang mga mukha ng mga taong nadadaanan niya, pati ang mga mukha ng mga kaibigan at mahal niya sa buhay. Ang mas masaklap, wala na rin siyang oras tumingin pataas sa Diyos. Sa kanyang paghahanap sa sahig ng $1, ang dami niyang pagpapala at tunay na kayamanan na nakaligtaan. Kaibigan, ganyan din ba tayo? Sa ating pagkaabala sa paghahanap buhay, nawawalan tayo ng tunay na buhay dahil napapabayaan ang ating kalusugan, nawawalay tayo sa piling ng ating mga minamahal, at nauubusan tayo ng oras para sa Diyos na nagmamahal sa atin. Sabi ni Jesus na naparito siya upang magkaroon tayo ng buhay na masaganang lubos. Huwag nating palampasin ang biyayang kanyang ipinagkakaloob. Tayong magdasal. Jesus, turuan niyo kami ng tamang pagbalanse ng mga prioridad upang aming matamo ang buhay na masaganang lubos na inyong pinangako. Amen.
Radyo, 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 Katipunan, radyo, Katipunan, radyo, Katipunan, radyo, 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 Katipunan, radyo, Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay atin sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng eskwela. Radyo, Katipunan, radyo, Katipunan, Katipunan, Kawal ni Ignacio, Katipunero sugo, todo sa kayod, tunong at tulong. Lipad na Blue Eagle, galing giting at tigil.
Palalimin ang kamalayan sa mga isyong napapanahon. Makisangkot at makiisa kasama ang Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan, ang Socio-Political Apostolate ng Kapisanan ni Jesus. Ito ang Kuwentuhang Bayan mula alas 11 ng umaga tuwing Biyernes dito lang sa Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM. Dahil naniniwala kami na posible ang isang mas mabuting lipunan at maaari itong simulan sa isang kwentuhan.
Ayan, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat and welcome to another program of Kuwentuhang Bayan dito sa Radyo Katipunan. And of course, this program is hosted by the Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan, the Socio-Political Apostolate of the Society of Jesus in the Philippines. No? So medyo special ang ating topic no ngayong araw. Pero baka magkamustahan muna tayo, Brother Chesko. How are you and how are you feeling entering into this episode?
Nako, maraming salamat sa iyong katanungan, Carlo. Excited ako kasi marami akong hindi nalalaman about our economy. At bilang psych major, wala talaga ako alam. At marami akong tanong, no? Parang lumabas yung issue, for example, ni Sandro days ago, and I really want to learn more about that. Is it really correct? Especially, I'm excited to hear the comments of Miss CJ, our guest today. Ikaw naman, Carlo, kamusta ka?
Okay din. Saktong knowledge lang, nakakatawa no. Parang ang sama natin sa mga psych majors. Psych majors unite, wala masyadong alam sa economics. Yun naman yung dating no. Grabe yung dating no. Hindi. Alam natin importante kahit yung behavioral economics, madaming psychology.
Naks naman.
Wow, diba? Diba? Pero of course hindi natin inaral yun, diba?
Wala talaga.
Sa psychology. Pero well, ako excited ako sa programa natin ngayon no kasi
very much.
Kinikwento ko nga kay Brother Cheska, and for those who are listening whether on Facebook, on YouTube and the other platforms no, on the live wave of the Radyo Katipunan no, economics is probably one of those topics no. So medyo na dumiretso na tayo sa topic natin no. But economics is one of those things na parang hindi madaling panghawakan ng mga tao, no? So, lahat tayo palaging may opinion tungkol sa politika, 'di ba? Marami tayong mga issues na nire-raise natin, and even if we are not in a sense, political scientist, di ba? Nakakapag-comment pa rin tayo. Pero kung pagdating sa ekonomiya, parang takot, no? Parang, hala, sobrang technical nito, di ba? Parang hindi talaga natin na, ano, no? Whether being able to give comments, no? And I guess one of the reasons bakit gusto din namin to magkaroon ng special episode, of course, with our guest, is really the idea, no? Na parang, uh, when we talk about economics,
Mhm.
when you look at Facebook, masyado siyang simplified, walang nuancing minsan yung mga tao, no?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
sometimes I feel, sabi ko nga kay Brother Chesco, your partisan position affects how you interpret your
Yeah,
economics, di
correct.
ba? And ako
Agreed, agreed.
parang, hindi ata yun, ano, tama, di ba? And of course,
Oo
dito
nga
sa
eh.
SLB, naniniwala kami na kailangan critical, no? At pag-isipan
Yes.
natin. Di ba, Brother Chesco?
Yes. Huwag tayo magpabiktima sa ating mga prejudices, ating mga biases. At talagang i-confirm natin kung ano talaga yung nangyayari. No? Ano mo, Carlo, guilty talaga ako dyan. Kasi minsan, ang sarap sisihin ng ating current administration. Pero the invitation is really to be critical, to really research on what's happening. Kahit medyo mahirap yung language ng economy, pero let's still try as much as possible to know the truth behind it and not take everything out of context, no? Parang yun rin yung aking comment, Carlo. Agree ako sa iyo. Yeah.
Well, of course, yung title natin for this episode is Debt, Inflation, Weakening Peso. Ano na ba gagawin natin dito, no? And
Oh,
maybe it's really
yan,
to
oo.
understand the
Yes.
Philippine economy, di ba?
Yes,
Pero
yes.
okay, without further ado, let's of course welcome our guest and a friend. Thank you so much for saying and saying yes to this, no? So we'd like to invite Miss CJ Galunan. Ayan, siya ay
Hello,
isang
Miss CJ!
Hello, good
Good
morning.
ayan,
morning!
siya
Ayun,
isang
maraming salamat din.
researcher and organizer ng Bukluran ng Manggagawang Pilipino. So maybe you'd like to introduce yourself lang quickly
Yeah,
after
yeah.
CJ. Ano ba yung mga ganap mo sa
Yes.
buhay mo?
Oo,
Ano ba
masyadong
itong
marami.
bukluran, CJ?
Too much for well-being. Pero yun, okay, thank you ulit sa invitation. I'm CJ Galunan. As mentioned by Carlo, ako ay isang organizer and also a researcher. Part of Bukluran ng Manggagawang Pilipino, a labor center that is working in many parts of our country, organizing unions as well as campaigns on the national level kaugnay ng pagkontra sa kontraktualisasyon, also the minimum wage, making sure it is approaching towards a living wage, as well as protecting and defending workers' rights. So yun yung mga core ng campaign ng BMP. Pero maliban sa BMP, I'm also involved in the tax justice movement as part of the development finance staff of the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development. So we do work on progressive taxation, how to ensure that taxation is just sa buong ekonomiya, but also focusing on specific sectors like extractive, so yung mga issues in taxation and mining. And I have also been teaching part-time sa Department of Economics sa Ateneo.
Yeah.
Yun. Pero tinigil ko muna kasi kailangan ko magpahinga in life. So, ayun. Pero
Kailangan rin
it was
alagaan ng well-being. Ganyan.
yes, it was a very pleasant experience naman. The students are really good.
Nice.
Kung nakapagpahinga ka na, meron kang 2 additional students sa mga class mo. No?
Sorry,
Nakikita
disturbing
ka
mo
dyan
lang
sa
kami
likod.
sa CJ. Naku, Carlo, first time ko narinig yung progressive taxation. No? Medyo interesting. Ano kaya ibig sabihin nun, Miss CJ? Baka mamaya pwede nating pag-usapan yun. No?
Yes.
Sige.
So, o nga, mamaya pwede natin pag-usapan yung mga advocacies, pero para sa pag-warm up talaga.
Yes.
Warm
no?
up?
Warm up.
Excited
We
na
will
ako.
open with the most exciting question that we have encountered siguro in the past 2 to 3 weeks, no? And ito, was Sandro Marcos, talaga parang the buzz.
Diretsahan.
Was Sandro Marcos correct when he mentioned that the peso is not weak because the peso is weak, but the peso is weak because the dollar
is strong.
Okay, so ano yung mga initial thoughts mo dyan, CJ?
Yeah,
And what
CJ,
does this mean?
do you agree
Okay.
with his statement? Should we really blame it all on the dollar? What do you think, CJ?
Well, first of all, I don't agree with Sandra's statement. Pero I think
Straightforward. Yeah.
before we get into why I don't agree, I also think it's important to address yung sinabi nyo at the beginning of the episode, no? Saying na why don't people understand economics is also why Sandro Marcos is banking on these arguments. And the first thing I tell my students sa klase namin sa Intro to Economics is a language of power. And whenever the powerful people like Sandro try to wield it, the language of economics, they often try to wield it in a way that obscures something very simple that is happening and tries to make it more complex para hindi maintindihan ng taong bayan, at the same time hindi sila makapag-demand from the government to do more. 'Di ba? So parang these economic concepts are thought to be the terrain of technocrats only. And Sandro would want to count himself as part of those technocrats by deploying the language of economics. And this is what I think is going on, no? Because Sandro Marcos was supposedly educated in all these elite schools in the United Kingdom, ganyan.
London, ano yun, di ba?
London
Parang
School of
something
Economics, ganyan.
Yeah.
Ayun, doon daw nanggagaling yung expertise niya. Pero yun, that's the reason why we need to be very critical about what these spokespersons of the powerful class are saying. And I think to start with the statement that he said regarding the peso, because I'm sure there will be many more statements of this degree, no? To start with that statement, there is a very sinister obfuscation that's happening, or very sinister yung pagpapalabo niya nung usapan. Kasi his exact statement was the peso is weak, not because the peso is weak, but because the dollar is strong. And before we get into that, kailangan nating tignan muna how exactly the exchange rate works. Diba? Paano nga ba tumataas o bumababa ang value ng currency? At iyon yung tanging tama doon sa sinabi niya. Ang sabi niya ay lahat ng tao daw kapag may crisis bumibili ng dollar. Pero yung susunod doon ay yung mas tama. Kapag binibili ang dollar, ang demanda ng dollar tumataas. And this is how exchange rates work in the global economy, no? Because different countries have their own economies, syempre iba-iba sila ng currency. Hindi naman pwedeng dolyar sa buong mundo ang pangbabayad natin, no? And because of that, kapag nagkakaroon ng kalakalan or trade between countries, kinakailangan nitong mediating factor, and that is the exchange rate, yung humigit na dito sa kalakalan. And how do values of the exchange rate move? So in the Philippines, ang tinitignan natin kadalasan ay yung value ng piso kontra dolyar. At ito rin for most of the world because nabubuhay tayo in a dollar-dominated global economy. Dahil dyan, ang tinitingnan ay piso kontra dolyar. Sa kasalukuyan, naglalaro between 58 to 59 pesos to $1. Ang ibig sabihin lang nun, kailangan mo ng 58 pesos or 59 para makabili ng $1.
$1.
Yes. And we call it appreciation kapag mas kumukonte yung piso na kailangan mo para bumili ng $1. And the reason why kahit tumataas yung values supposedly in absolute terms, no, from 56 to 58, tinatawag yan na depreciation dahil ang ibig sabihin, mas marami yung kinakailangan mong piso para bumili ng $1. So that means, in essence, kung ano man yung binibili natin sa dolyar, that means any goods that are coming into the country or services that are coming into the country from the global economy ay mas nagmamahal. So, yun yung dynamics ng devaluation and appreciation na nangyayari. And when we say that Sandro is right, na kapag tumataas ang demand for the dollar, tumataas ang value ng dollar relative to the rest of the world, lalo na ang piso, ang ibig sabihin lang niyan ay mas maraming may gusto ng dolyar kumpara sa piso. And that is, yes, go ahead.
My curious question lang siguro CJ at this point, no? Baka mabilis na. But why is the dollar preferred in a time of crisis. I guess that's one of the factors, like parang what's driving people to buy more dollars that's
Mhm.
making it stronger in that sense.
Yes. So, sa siguro sa kasaysayan ng global economy, no, yung pandaigdigang merkado ng currency, meron kasing trend na kapag nagkakaroon ng krisis sa anumang bahagi ng mundo, whether it be conflicts or whether it be yung mga sanctions that prevent supply from going into
Yes.
countries, ang tinatawag na safe haven currency ay yung dollar. Kasi hanggat stable yung dollar, mape-preserve mo yung value ng currency habang volatile o tumataas baba yung currency sa ibang bansa. Yun. Although I would want to make a very important distinction between what Sandro is saying na kaya
Yeah.
tumataas ang demand for the dollar dahil sa panahon ng crisis, ito ang nangyayari. Hindi ito ang nangyayari. And it also points us to very systemic dynamics no, sa ating pandaigdigang ekonomiya, the undue influence of the United States on the financial system, for example. Dahil kapag tinignan natin yung pinaka-recent na mga crisis, that includes
Yeah.
the early 2000s, yung dot-com bubble, 2008, the global financial crisis,
Financial.
and most recently, itong COVID-19 pandemic no, since 2020. What we are seeing actually, dahil sangkot yung US dito sa mga crisis na ito, dahil nandun nangyayari din sa kanila yung crisis, actually, hindi na nagiging safe haven currency yung US. In more ways than one, parang nangyayari nga, lumalabas pa yung investors from the US to other more safer havens like the EU. So this very recent hike in the value of the US dollar compared to the rest of the world is not because of the crisis. It's because of something that the US Federal Reserve o yung central bank niya ay may policy na ginawa, and that is to increase its interest rate. So, dahil tumaas yung interest rate ng US, mas gusto na ngayon ng mga tao ng dolyar. That is what is driving the demand for dollars, hindi yung crisis. So, yun. As in one thing lang. Si Sandro actually reminds me of those, yung Econ Bros na nakatake ng, isang Econ 101, tapos tingin nila, master na nila yung
Marami na
ekonomiya.
silang alam. Ganyan.
Econ
Oo.
Bros.
Question
Very
lang,
gendered.
CJ. Parang you mentioned na the US Federal Reserve parang increased their interest rate. Parang what was the reason for this, if I may ask?
Yes. So, as we know, there is another widespread problem aside from the devaluation of the Philippine currency. It's also inflation, no? At nangyayari din to sa buong mundo, including the United States. And that's the primary reason kung bakit nagtaas ng interest rate yung Federal Reserve ng US. It's to curb what they see is inflation na excessive na raw. I have a different opinion about whether it's right or wrong, pero baka for later na yan.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess in this whole context, so basically my sense is that a statement that is being said by an econ bro like Sandro Marcos,
Econ bro,
it's
quote unquote.
it's really in a sense, diba, trying to diffuse responsibility on the government to do anything.
Right.
Diba, the idea is that all of these things we have no control over, really, right? So
Right.
bakit it's like don't blame us, right? It's really like that, diba? Parang don't blame us because and to a certain extent, part of me states that maybe there is a tension, but maybe you can try to explain a bit more. Can the Philippines really do something, to prevent our peso from weakening? And then maybe the second aspect I want to say, comparatively. So I'm assuming siguro as the dollar is getting stronger, the other currencies around the world is weakening. But is the Philippines weakening faster than other currencies also, diba, comparatively? Yeah.
Yes, very, very good questions. I think the second is actually is a gateway to the first. Tipong, once we answer the second question, then we can see whether the government can really do something. And what is happening, even if we just look at Asian currencies, or currencies that belong to the same development group as the Philippines, sabihin na natin
Yes.
yung mga lower middle income countries or middle income countries in Asia katulad ng Vietnam and Thailand, kapag tinignan itong mga ekonomiyang ito and their currencies, ang Pilipinas ang isa sa pinakamabilis bumulusok na currencies, especially in the recent wave of devaluation. Kahit pa bumababa yung currency nila, kumpara to the United States dollar, hindi pa rin kasing bilis ng Pilipinas. And there's data available sa Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas if you look at peso cross rates to see relative to other currencies, how is the peso moving. At ang rason dito kung bakit comparatively napakabilis ng pagbulusok ng piso is there is virtually no demand for the Philippine peso in the global market, no? Ang ibig sabihin, syempre magkakaroon ng demand for the Vietnamese currency, magkakaroon ng demand for the Thai currency kasi we are importing rice from them, no? As well as the rest of the world. Meron silang imports. What creates demand for currencies are two primary things, no? The first is exports. Kapag ang bansa mo ay merong nilalabas na good or service that the rest of the world wants, syempre magkakaroon sila ng demand for your currency. So sabihin na natin kung ang Pilipinas, pinagbuti niya ang pagpapatibay ng kanyang agricultural sector to the point that we can be an exporter of rice, tataas ang demand for the Philippine peso. So kahit pa tumaas yung value ng dollar, hindi ganon kalaki yung magiging impact niya to the peso. Hindi ganon kalaki yung pag-devaluation. The second source of demand for a currency is foreign direct investment, no? At ang problema natin sa Pilipinas ay investors think that we do not have a stable policy environment. Tingtingnan nila ang Pilipinas bilang isang volatile policy environment na kapag nagpasok sila ng pera dito, maya-maya hindi na nila alam kung yung ekonomiya ba ay maaasahan nila na mag-deliver doon sa kanilang expectations. So yun yung that is what creates demand for currencies, and that is also two things that we do not have, no? And that speaks to yung unang tanong, no? Well, what can governments do, no? Ano nga ba ang magagawa ng Pilipinas? Hindi tayo naniniwala kay Sandro na wala tayong magagawa. I think Carlo is right, no? He's trying to diffuse the responsibility of the Philippine government. And before I get into yung concrete ways that we can respond to this, it's very sinister because this is exactly what the grandfather did. This is what FEM did in the 1980s, no? He blamed the debt crisis on external economic conditions, saying na ito ay buhat ng pagtataas ng interest rates of the Federal Reserve, yada yada. So this is systemic, no? Tipong ginagawa talaga nito sa dugo ata nila ang maging econ growth. Ayun. Pero yes, parang building off from that, saying that an economy so small like the Philippines, ganyan, parang may ganun silang na what can the Philippines do against the big United States? Parang may ganong pagtingin, no? And the answer is we can actually do many things, no? We can actually do many things so that if we don't want to be a developed country na talagang like that controls the entire world's currency, but we can do something to at least be closer to countries like Thailand and Vietnam. And I think there are three major things that we can do. The first is to strengthen our exports from the Philippines that do not rely on imported inputs. Ibig sabihin, kung meron man tayong i-export sa ibang bansa, hindi dapat ito nakaasa sa pag-import ng ibang mga bagay from other countries. Kasi ito yung nangyayari sa mga malalaking export industries natin. Kung alam niyo yung semiconductor industry, the Philippines is very strong actually sa semiconductors. Kaso yung problema natin, yung malakas nating export industry, malaki rin yung kanyang dependence doon sa import. So na-erode din yung export competitiveness.
Yes.
At kaya kailangan ng tinatawag na backward linkages. Kung saan yung mga inputs mo ay magmumula din dito sa Pilipinas for you to ensure na you you get the value of your export. So yun yung isa sa pinakauna. Yung ikalawa, yes, and it's also related to the first, no? We need to systematically lessen our dependence on imports. Hindi lang as inputs in production, hindi lang bilang ginagamit to produce our manufacturing and services, but especially in basic commodities. Ang paggamit natin, for example, of imported fuel, imported energy sources, at ang
Food.
yes, especially food.
Yeah.
Definitely food. Ang food import dependency is what creates this vulnerability to volatilities in the exchange rate. Kasi syempre, rice, for example, once the value of the peso declines relative to the dollar, at ini-import natin ang bigas, which is an essential commodity, nagmamahal ngayon
Yes, nagmamahal
yung binibili
yung bigas.
nating
Yeah.
bigas. And that is what's happening currently, no? And that also leads to food shortages na hindi lang economic, very social din yung epekto,
impact.
no? Yes, so that is the second. We should aim as much as possible to lessen our dependence on imports.
Right.
Ayun.
Pero medyo feeling ko mahirap ata mag-decrease ng dependence, especially on imports regarding fuel, no? Parang we have to really import our fuel supply, no? I think Marcos is doing something about that. I mean, he's talking with the Russian government if I'm not
buy oil,
mistaken, no?
Oo, yung bilateral talks with Russia, no?
I don't know. But yeah, I agree with you. I definitely get it. Now we have to strengthen our exports and decrease our dependence to imports, no? Parang like for example, we are good in rice supplies and our sugar also, and probably salt, no? Parang
Yes.
we should be doing something to change our system.
Industries
Yeah,
to develop
industries.
this. Yeah.
Let's
Oo.
develop it so that we can have our own supply, we can have the strength to actually export and actually decrease our, yun nga, sabi mo CJ, dependence on the imports, no? Thank you for that. Gets. Nako.
Yes.
What's the third? May third, di ba?
Yeah,
na,
oo pala.
pwede ko
Oo.
sabihin.
Yung third actually yung sinabi ni Chesko.
Okay.
Yung,
Yes!
it ties it
Hindi ka na,
together.
hindi ka na
no?
bro, hindi ka na
Yes.
bro Econ.
Hindi ako,
Ano ka na?
graduate na ako.
Oo. Ayun. So, the third is what we call more broadly in Econ as structural transformation. Ibig sabihin, it's to look at the three sectors of the economy, agriculture, industry, and services as areas where the state can play a more active role. Ibig sabihin, kaya niya dapat i-steer yung direction of agriculture to complement an industrial policy to complement the services sector. Kasi ang nangyayari sa Pilipinas, especially since the late 1980s, parang nawala na yung industry natin as a sector, no? We embarked on this deindustrialization na umasa na tayo on services, and that's because wala nang active role yung gobyerno in steering these sectors. Wala na siyang active role in encouraging public investments, wala na siyang active role in making sure that our industry is robust compared to other Asian economies na doon talaga sila nakasandig. And ang nangyari na lang, kung ano yung kailangan ng pandaigdigang merkado, and in this case, it's services, no? Yung mga BPOs, call centers, doon na lang tayo pumunta. So, reactive yung naging policies so far, not active. Yun.
Yes.
So, that's the third.
Right.
Yeah,
Sige, Carlo, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, part of me is siguro, no, the nuancing that I just want to understand better. Because I feel like the whole parang immediately we want to blame government. And part of me wants to think that even in the ABC, the three things, it's structural. So in a sense, totoo, it's true that the government can actually do something. And by just articulating a clear strategy and policy, diba, that's a government intervention. But is it also right, diba, to blame current government for for the structural cons. Yun yung mas nandun ako sa level na yun, di ba? Na parang
Yeah.
we've kind of simplified public debate, di ba? Not to even nuance these kinds of things, di ba? Fair ba yon na sabihin natin na kasalanan lahat ni ng presidente yung nangyayari sa ekonomiya, di ba? Parang what's your thoughts on that whole thing also?
I do think it's important to look at actions by specific administrations kasi sila yung bumubuo ng entire historical trend. Parang
yes.
hindi mo mahihiwalay yung actions of a particular president from what eventually became the trend. Either lumabas sila doon or they conform to it. They still form the trend. And what we are seeing now with Marcos Jr., no, this is very similar. This is very similar to what I said earlier doon sa pangatlo, no. Very reactive yung gobyernong ito.
Yes. Yes.
And it's very reactive, not even sa paraan na okay, may ganitong problema, ito yung ipapasa naming solusyon. What they are doing actually is they are reactive na wait and see approach. This is what's happening now with the devaluation, especially with its impact on inflation. Pwede natin yung tignan mamaya in depth. Pero that's where I think inaction is very harmful to society, no? And that's what the Marcos Jr. administration has been doing. Very reactive and even inactive dito sa mga policy areas where there are immediate solutions that they could be providing.
Yeah.
Ngayon ko lang na-feel yung, tama yung sinasabi ni CJ, no? Like, at this moment, parang my reflection is, I hate part of me says, I hate the simplification of partisan analysis of the economy, di ba? Na parang you blame government. It's something that kind of like pet peeve ko siya. Pero tama yung sinasabi nga ni CJ, that there is a sinister aspect to it where parang it's met with silence, di ba? Na parang wala silang solution because they want to say that it's something outside lang, di ba? Parang that's nothing we can do about it, di ba? It's that's our situation. Parang ganun lang siya and we kind of just need to survive. Parang ganun yun, di ba? Yun yung sinasabi. Parang ganun na yung we just have to accept this as a reality, no? And tama it's sinister because of how people look at economy, people say na hindi nga siya technical, we can't critique anything about it, di ba? Parang ganun and wala lang, that's so scary for me. I mean, kami din CJ, no, mga taong simbahan, no, we work on these kinds of things and when we go on the ground, di ba? Parang most of the time it's so difficult to fully explain na, you know, you can demand more from your government, di ba? In actually trying to address these concerns, di ba? Go Chess.
Agreed to that. And actually have another question for CJ, no? What do you think about our economic team, our current technocrat? You said something about them being reactive, in fact, inactive, no? And we all know from news na actually Marcos chose certain technocrats that are actually good
known, di ba? Yeah,
known
kilala,
to be good
they're
in
respected.
economics. Exactly. So ano bang kamusta ba yung assessment mo sa ating economic team ng administrasyong ito? And also parang kahapon pinag-usapan natin, Carlo, no, yung National Economic and Development Authority said, the NEDA said na they're confident that the government remains on track to achieving its medium and long-term economic goals, no? Parang
Ano ba yung goal?
Ano ba yung goal? And should we trust them? Should we be a little bit skeptical? Given our situation,
what attitude?
What attitudes should we take with their statements right now?
Yes. So actually, I think we can look at the economic team of Marcos Jr. in two ways. No, una, I agree fully that this is a great team in technocratic terms. Napakagaling nila in terms of their experience in economic management. There are, kumbaga, if you probably look at the experience of these people in agencies of government. Si Diokno was not only in DOF, he was also in the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, arguably the most powerful institution in this country, no? And among others, kahit yung kanyang NEDA Secretary General is also coming from very respected positions, not just in the academe, but in government and all these multilateral institutions. So kung titignan talaga in terms of experience, these people know how to keep an economy stable. And I think that is the primary drive of Marcos Jr., that the reason why he brought these people in. He wants to keep the economy stable. Yun yung macroprudential and yung mga macroeconomic stability is what their goal is, no? However, we also know that the cabinet is only beholden to what the president wants to do. So if the president says we can't do anything about it, we can't sabihin ng presidente, okay, let's just wait for the FDI to come in kasi yun yung mga nahakot ko from New York, etc. The economic team can't do anything about it. That's one part of it. Na parang their experience, their expertise can only go so far under the misdirection of whoever is in charge. The second thing I would say is that they were formed as a team to keep the economy stable. But is that what we really need at this point? Is stability what the Filipinos need at this point? Na parang, kasi the reason why I'm reflecting on this is because I also studied, when I was doing my master's, yung economic development of the Philippines and how industrial policy developed. Tapos, napansin ko, noong panahon ni Marcos Sr., there was a very active attempt at least creating an illusion of an active government, no? Kaya sila kumukuha ng utilities and making it public, kaya nina-nationalize yung oil and gas, etc. All of these things were made to portray that the government is strong in terms of its control on the economy. However, we do not see this with Marcos Jr. There is no ambition in terms of its economic policy goals. Right. In a sense, what it just wants is to maintain status quo. And the economic policy team is perfect for that because they have served in many administrations and that's what they've done to keep the economy stable. But we don't know yet in terms of long-term goals, like for example, reduction of inequality, itong tinatawag nating structural transformation, making sure that wages are keeping up with inflation along with yung living wage demands, pati na rin yung mga productivity and higher value added objectives that we are aiming for. So these long-term things, we're not so sure kasi we haven't seen that these members of the economic team have committed to it. They seem to be very at peace doon sa just keeping the economy stable.
Nice. Yeah. I kind of got a sense, no? And of course, if you're speaking in a bit more like ideological language, no? Parang neoliberal policies are really just sustained, diba? Parang to a certain extent, there's continuity across different administrations. I don't think anyone would radically want to shake the economic structure too much because that's not exactly but ako siguro one question, no, maybe as we move towards the latter part of our program, it's really the question of inflation, right? Because I think how do we make sense of it? Again, I think similar questions to the peso depreciation. To what extent can we control it? What can we do to control it? And is there such a good thing as good inflation? Di ba yung mga ganun, no? Is that something that we need to understand? Kasi parang, my part of my frustration, no, with media institutions, no, is that I don't think media institutions are trying hard enough to explain to the common person economic things, literally, right? Like, di ba, you report all these things like tumaas yung debt, tumaas yung inflation, but no one really explains what it means really. Yeah. 'Di ba? To the economy. Parang ano siya, no? Nakakatakot lang marinig ko, tumaas yung debt natin, 'di ba? But 'di ba, it's creating a weird 'di ba? Parang perception. So what do you think of it, no? So what's your sense of the growing inflation? Is it something we can control? Does it make sense? Is it a good, bad thing immediately? Mga ganun.
Mhm. Yes, I think at this point, especially if you talk to people on the ground, in communities, in people's organizations, they would say that their primary concern at the moment is inflation. And for good
Taasan ng
reason,
pa.
no? I think
Yes.
that's the first thing that we should be doing when we try to make sense of inflation. How do people understand it, no? And from the economist's point of view, sa amin tingin namin, simple lang yan. Basically, what the government does is, nag-assemble siya ng isang bayong or basket of goods and services. Sinasabi niya na, ito yung mga kadalasang binibili ng Pilipino. So that includes rice, canned goods, pamasahe, LPG, etc. Iipon-ipunin niya yan. Tapos, i-measure niya kung ano yung presyo ng lahat ng laman ng bayong na yon in 2021 at ikukumpara niya ito from last year, so 2020, sabihin na natin. Parang ang gagawin niya, sasabihin, tumaas ba yung value o yung kailangan mong bayaran para
Presyo.
makuha mo itong bayong na ito. And that's what the Consumer Price Index, yung CPI, which is the basis for inflation, that's what it measures. No? At itong 2022, September, sinasabi nilang tumaas ang inflation ng 6.9%. Okay? And this is a year-on-year measure. Ibig sabihin, kumpara noong September 2021, mas mataas ang presyo ng bilihin by almost 7%. Yun yung kumbaga, kapag binilang mo yung pera mo sa wallet, kung meron kang 100 pesos, ngayon kailangan mo na ng 107 para
107.
bayaran yung
Same
ginagastos
goods.
mo from before. No? So yun yung inflation o yung pagtaas ng bilihin sa merkado. And where does it come from, no? Napaka-mystical, tama si Carlo. When we look at inflation figures, na parang, andyan na yung percentage. Para siyang binababa ng PSA as a mythical number. Pero,
Yes.
ayun, it comes from many things, but primarily, dalawang bagay, no? Dalawang bagay. And this would also answer the question of, is there good inflation? And what do we do about it, no? The first is what we call supply-driven inflation. Kasi sa ekonomiya natin, meron tayong dalawang panig. There is demand, there is supply, no? Ibig sabihin ng supply, yung mga bagay na kinakailangan sa production or yung mga inputs na ginagamit natin, no? Or inputs din sa social reproduction. Sabihin na natin, pagkain na kinakain ng mga tao para sila ay maging produktibong manggagawa. So that also counts towards supply-driven inflation, no? So, yung mga paggalaw ng presyo sa pandaigdigang merkado para dito sa mga pangangailangan natin in production, and most of these are fuel, especially today.
Yes.
Ang nangyayari talaga sa bansa natin ay supply-driven inflation. As with almost the entire world, because of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, nagkakaroon ng problem securing supply in fuel and gas. And because of this, tumataas yung presyo ng ini-import nating fuel. At dahil doon, marami siyang spillover effect sa ekonomiya, no? Una na dito ay yung pagtaas ng pamasahe. Napakalaki nung tinaas ng pamasahe only in a few months. At kasama rin dito, syempre, fuel is an important input in production. Yung mga truck that are transporting goods and services from one place to another rely on fuel. So, nag-feed siya into the entire economy. As kahit pa supply lang ito, no? Isang bagay lang. And actually, sa estimates ng Philippine Statistical Authority, 2.2% of the entire 6.9% ay nagmumula sa fuel inflation. So without that, nasa 4.7 lang yata. And itong supply-driven inflation, what is very harmful is that walang nag-gain dito maliban sa mga negosyante who raise prices just because. The working class does not gain from supply-driven inflation, nor does the poor. No, there is actually what we call the poverty inflation rate, o yung inflation rate na nararanasan ng bottom 30% of the income distribution, yung pinakamahirap na 30%. Ito yung ginawa ni Dr. Dennis Mapa before he was appointed to the PSA. Ang sabi niya dito, pinaka-apektado ng pagtaas ng presyo ng bilihin ay yung mga 30% na pinakamahirap sa ating population. At lalo na sa presyo ng fuel, presyo ng pagkain, presyo ng housing. Itong tatlong bagay na ito, napakalaki ng epekto sa mahihirap. And this is what we are seeing in supply-driven inflation. The three things are increasing and therefore the poor and the working class are hurt the most. So yun yung unang-una at ito yung nakikita natin sa kasalukuyan. The second is what we are seeing in think pieces, no? Sinasabi nila that inflation is not all bad. We should not address inflation kasi actually that means that the economy is heating up towards a healthier state. Ganyan, parang ganon, no? And the second type of inflation is what we call demand-driven inflation. And this simply means na tumataas yung consumption of goods and services, tumataas din yung pagbili o pag-avail ng mga tao ng mga goods sa merkado, mga serbisyo. Ang ibig sabihin lang nito ay may mga halimbawa nito, no? Tulad ng Pasko. Kapag Pasko, merong 13th month pay ang mga tao. Obviously, dahil may 13th month pay, mas maraming pambili, and this is a signal for businesses to raise prices, no? At ito rin yung sinasabi nila tungkol sa ayuda. Kapag nagbigay ang gobyerno ng ayuda, syempre, mas maraming pambili ang tao. To businesses, this is a signal na, okay, maraming bumibili, kailangan kong taasan ng presyo. That's second. The third is minimum wage hikes, no? Kapag tinaas ang minimum wage, syempre tumataas din yung consumption of minimum wage workers. And they call it good inflation kasi it triggers a virtuous cycle. Meron siyang magandang dinudulot, no? And this is that because wages and ayuda, social protection increases, tumataas yung consumption noong may mga pangangailangan, and tumataas yung investment ng negosyo sa ekonomiya. Dahil nakikita nila, maraming bumibili, maganda yung kita, mas maraming investment. At tumataas yung employment as a result. Dahil habang dumadaming investment, dumadami rin yung kanilang hinahire na workers. So it triggers that virtuous cycle. And I agree that this type of inflation does not need to be addressed in the same aggressive manner as supply-driven inflation. Kasi kapag kinwash mo yan, as they usually do with inflation, any type of it, no? Mahihirapan ka ngayon na makita ulit yung ganong type of virtuous cycle. So this is what has been happening in the US, no? They're having good inflation kasi very very alive yung kanilang labor market, tumataas yung wages, pero sabi ng gobyerno, teka, sobra yan, no? So kailangan nating and this is actually syempre malapit sa puso ko yung the perspective of labor, no? This demand-driven inflation is class warfare. Kasi once you say to workers that is too much growth, you're already telling them that their wages should be reduced, basically. Parang yun yung sinasabi natin that good inflation should not be curbed as much as possible.
Yes.
Yun. So those are two things, but I don't think we are seeing good inflation right now in the Philippines. Maybe in the US there was, pero that's not what's happening here.
So we are more on the supply-driven inflation, no?
Very much. Very much.
Natatrack yan ng government. I mean, economists can actually figure out na parang if the inflation is increasing by, I don't know, let's say 5% or 6%, the government can actually say na no, this part of the inflation is supply-driven and then this part of the is demand-driven. Ganun ba yun?
Yes. Oo, meron ganun. Kasi una, sa supply-driven, it's easy to see ano yung prices ng imports or ano yung prices ng inputs mo in production. No? Madali lang naman. I think, yun, it's just a matter of making sure the evidence comes first before the theory.
Galing. Alam mo, parang feel ko, estudyante ako. If you just know the amount of notes I have right now on my house. Parang economics 101.
Pa-share naman mamaya. CJ,
Okay.
just to make it explicit, no, I'm coming from, a normal person, a person in a non-economic background, how do you explicitly relate inflation with the peso depreciation? Parang how are they related pa?
Mhm.
Ano yung relationship nila?
Sige. I think una, it's very core to the problem of inflation in the Philippines that we rely very heavily on imports. Yung biggest components of our supply-driven inflation are food and fuel, both of which are highly import dependent, no? So once devaluation happens, nagmamahal din yung presyo ng bilihin for those
Right.
imported goods here in the Philippines,
Right.
no? Ayun. And that's a very concrete thing that's happening. As you become more dependent on imports, you also make your economy more vulnerable to inflationary episodes dahil lang sa global demand shocks. Yun.
Okay,
Ayun.
thank you. CJ,
Yeah,
gets ko na.
Actually, may nakalimutan akong sagutin na tanong ni Carlo kanina.
Oh, go ahead.
Which, yung what can we do about inflation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Strategies.
Ayun. Yes. A very important question. And I think very simple lang naman yung sagot, no? For supply-driven inflation, which we're facing right now in the Philippines, there is a very important need to critique what is currently being deployed as the choice policy, which is to hike the interest rates, no? Ginagawa ng gobyerno yan dahil sinasabi nila na kapag tinaasan ng interest rates, hindi na masyadong hihiram yung mga tao sa mga bangko ng loans.
Yes.
Therefore, bababa yung kanilang consumption. This is misframing the problem, no? Sinasabi nila na kailangang bumaba yung paggastos ng mga tao. But what is actually the problem in supply-driven inflation, people don't have enough money to buy goods and services. So you can't restrict access to credit by hiking interest rates. So anong kailangan gawin ng gobyerno? What the government should do is deploy fiscal policy. Ibig sabihin, gamitin yung budget bilang instrument to address these cost of living crises. Ang ibig sabihin, gamitin ang ayuda, social protection, gamitin ang tax, for example, to make sure that the government has enough revenues, it does not have to rely on debt to fund these social protection measures. And second, another thing it should do is to try and break down monopolies. Ibig sabihin, yung mga korporasyon sa bansa that have undue economic power in price setting. Kasama dito yung mga big retail giants that have control on rent, housing prices. Kasama rin dito yung private companies collecting or controlling electricity distribution. They have a lot of influence over price setting. And this is what the government should do in order to address supply-driven inflation. Increase people's incomes so that they can buy these more expensive goods, but at the same time make sure that there is no price manipulation that's going on in the market. Second, doon sa demand-driven inflation, as much as possible yun, wag naman pakialaman, especially if it's triggering a virtuous cycle. Sabi nga namin sa in Econ, you don't hit a tiny nail with a sledgehammer. And that's what interest rate hikes do, especially in the context of demand-driven inflation. Parang napakaliit na problema, tapos napakalaki nung ng response mo in a way that it already depresses people's incomes, creates unemployment even kapag tinaas ang interest rates. And second, if we want to maximize the gains from demand-driven inflation, we have to be selective with investment. Kailangan yung gobyerno step in siya and say that the only businesses that can establish themselves in this country are those that can comply with these regulations to ensure that we can keep this virtuous cycle going. Otherwise, walang sense ang mas mataas na investment kung lalabas lang din siya in the form of hot money flows. So ganong which both require an active government, not just a reactive government.
Yes! Yun na ang actually conclusion natin, Carlo. It requires an active government, not a reactive one or an inactive one, di ba? Right. So, 4 minutes na lang tayo, Carlo.
Yes.
Ang dami kong natutunan kay CJ. Grabe.
Correct.
I will review my notes later.
Correct. And I think, well, ako on my side, no, I think it has been a enlightening experience, and I love how I guess concepts can be explained more
Yeah.
simply. Parang I feel like that's the danger, di ba? Like at the end of the day, parang when we talk about economics, it's so technical. It's couch.
Mm,
Sometimes it feels like law. Alam mo yung law, right? Law seems like one of those inaccessible
Yes.
languages, inaccessible. Ano, and when
mm,
people talk in legal language, it's like, wait, that's not for me anymore. But
right, right.
in the economy, it affects us so real, and I think people should be given the chance to at least weigh in and have intelligent conversations about it,
Right.
no. But I guess as a closing point, CJ, and sayang, sorry, we didn't get to talk so much about your advocacy, but for sure we'd love to invite you another time. And
Cool.
we actually in some programs, no, pinag-usapan din namin yung church and labor, no, because
Mm,
kaya even the Catholic social teachings were anchored on it started with labor concerns, 'di ba? It was confronting capitalism at its most brutal form, no? And maybe in the future we'd love to talk about your advocacies then on living
yes,
wage,
yes,
yung mga
please.
ganon, on what are the struggles and why we can't seem to increase wages. And I was telling sila
Yeah.
Chesco when we do our national situationers, ang depressing
Mm,
na yung real wage natin hindi nag-i-increase. Alam mo yan, it's like a flat
mm,
Yes.
line, di ba? Over the
mm,
years, even though we're more productive. But anyway, I think that's a topic for ano. But maybe for you, to our guests who are listening, what's your invitation when it comes to popular participation in economic discussions,
mm,
right? Like what
mm,
do we,
mm.
right? Like what's your invitation to people?
Yeah, parang Carlo, one of the questions na baka pwede mong sagutin, CJ, is meron kaming concern before. What were parang what are the right questions to ask in terms of our,
Yes, what are the right questions to ask?
econs? Ano kaya
When you see
yung
a news article,
yes, instead of magpanic ka, instead of mag-distance ka doon sa news, what can be a right disposition or attitude, or what are the questions that we can ask
Mhm.
to this news? Yeah.
Yes, ayun. So, my invitation, I think, not just to the viewers, but also to civil society at large, no, is for two things to happen. The first is that the people should reclaim economics. Um,
mm,
we should think of economics not just as an academic discipline or as a
Mm,
language of technocrats, but it is a language that we can use to describe our own
yes.
challenges that we face.
Yes.
And that also includes siguro a message to people that to listen to what ordinary workers, ordinary people have to
yes.
say about the economy. They have a say in the economy, and I hope that this can form a greater part of economic coverage sa media, no? What people say about the economy. And the questions that we want to ask is first, take a look at history, no? Is this
Mhm.
something that is only happening now, or is this something that we have seen before? Ano yung mga causes nito? Bakit ito nangyayari? And third, what can the government do about it? Huwag tayong
Mm.
maniniwala doon sa mga nagsasabi na walang magagawa ang gobyerno, no? There is always something that is going on.
Sandro.
And lastly, I would say siguro to an audience that is interested in organizing other people into political causes, the
Yes.
question that is most important to ask is sinong nakikinabang dito? Whenever an economic problem
Yes.
arises, sino nakikinabang dito at paano natin ito mababago para mamamayan yung makinabang sa ekonomiya?
All right,
Grabe.
CJ.
Solid.
Solid. Galing,
I
galing.
feel very consoled. I don't
Yeah.
know. This conversation has been such a great personally, thank you talaga, CJ. Every time I
Thank
think
you,
about
thank you.
Thank you
economics, I
very
get
much, CJ.
anxiety, no? Pero I feel like this conversation, the way you explained it, no, I'm sure our audience as well, who's been listening, for sure, na enlightened talaga, no?
Enlightened, definitely.
Salamat, salamat. You also asked very good questions, so paper.
Wow.
Was, hanggang doon lang kayo ng mga psychologists.
You asked the right question, which is half of
Wow.
the work.
Nice, nice, nice. Hindi na tayo. Graduate na
Ikaw,
tayo sa
Chesco,
bro.
final ano mo?
Ego. Ako, similar with you, no? Parang I felt I've always had that kind of econ anxiety. If there's insight, there's math anxiety, there's econ anxiety. But with our conversation right now, I learned a lot, and I'm very inspired to search more about our economic situation and to really ask the right questions. No, this is something that's not academic only. Sabi ni CJ, it's really something that's real to me, something that affects lives, including mine and my family and everyone else, my friends. So, thank you very much, CJ. Thank you very much for enlightening us and our viewers. So
Yes, and of course,
hope to invite you again para may
yes,
time
for
na rin
sure.
to
Sige lang.
We'd
talk
love to
about
talk
your
about your
advocacy.
advocacy in the future,
Yeah.
especially
Di ko na natanong yung progressive taxation. Ako, search ko na
Next
lang.
time.
Yan na,
mamaya.
lahat na yan. Lalabas na yan sa susunod natin na episode with
Nice.
Economics with CJ. Wow, ganun pala yung ano natin. But
May
anyway,
sarili
thank
ng
you,
talk
thank you
show
so-
si CJ na.
Thank you so much, CJ. And for those who are listening, thank you for joining us for our program in Kuwentuhang Bayan. Again, we are live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 noon to talk about critical social issues that are happening in the country, no, and trying to make sense of it. And of course, with our guest this morning with CJ Galunan, I hope that you were able to understand better din, no, yung mga nangyayari sa ating ekonomiya. So, hoping that you'll follow us, and we'll see you again in the next week. Maraming salamat sa
Salamat.
inyo.
See you next
Thank
Friday.
you.
Salamat po.
Palalimin ang kamalayan sa mga isyong napapanahon. Makisangkot at makiisa kasama ang Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan, ang social-political apostolate ng Kapisanan ni Jesus. Ito ang Kuwentuhang Bayan mula alas 11 ng umaga tuwing Biyernes dito lang sa Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM. Dahil naniniwala kami na posible ang isang mas mabuting lipunan at maaari itong simulan sa isang kwentuhan. Radyo Katipunan. News, insights, inspiration. Radyo Katipunan. Down from the hill and down to the world. Radyo Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle.
Radyo